And third time's a charm. Tried recording this 2 times now, and we're having some hard drive issues, it appears. At any rate, welcome to episode 35. Drew Shoals is our guest today, the drummer for Train. Phenomenal episode. I can't wait to get into it. I also want to let you guys know Matt is not here for the recording of this intro, nor was he here for the recording of the episode, but he is here with us in spirit, as he always is. Okay, so today's podcast is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle makes it easy to build a stunning website for your music in minutes. Choose from hundreds of mobile-friendly themes. Customize your content in just a few clicks with their super easy visual editor. You don't need to know code or have a degree or any of that crazy stuff. You can just get it done, have your website, rock and roll. All the features you need for a professional website are already built right in, including tools to sell your music and merch, commission-free, mailing list tools, integrations to pull in all your socials, and really good live support team that helps us out all the time, and they can help you too. Bandzoogle plans start at just $8.29 a month. One of the cheapest prices I found, and with so many integrations, it's a no-brainer. That includes your own free custom domain name in that price. So go to bandzoogle.com, try it free for 30 days, and be sure to use our promo code TMTS. We got you guys 15% off your first year. That's promo code TMTS. I'm going to stop talking before this thing deletes again, mysteriously. So let's rock. Here's Drew Shoals. First of all, where do we find you right now in the world? Where are you on the road?
Yeah, so I'm based in New York City. And we were just there on tour. We got to play Madison Square Garden, and we went to Atlantic City and played there. But now I'm in Atlanta, and we're about halfway through tour right now, doing about like 45 dates with Hall & Oates around the U.S. And so I got a day off in Atlanta, just trying to take in that southern heat.
Yeah. It's like no other for sure. So, how'd you get started in music? Let's go back to the beginning and kind of work forward from there.
Yeah. So, I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and I started drums pretty early. I was 5 years old, and my mom decided to put me in drum lessons because she was a musician and wanted to jam with me. And it's rare that parents pick the noisiest instrument, but luckily my parents were supportive of that. So I took to it pretty early on and really enjoyed practicing and playing in talent shows and bands at school and playing in church, and started gigging around professionally in high school, just in like a jazz band and like an R&B band. And just kept it up through college. I went to a small liberal arts school called Whitman in the Northwest, and played a lot there, and then decided when I was done with school to pursue it professionally. So I moved back to Portland, and that was probably like mid 2000s, and just played with a number of rock bands, pop bands, singer songwriters, and started touring based out of Portland. And that's when I met the lead singer of Train, Pat Monahan, about 10 years ago, when he did a solo album and a tour in support of that. And so we've just stayed in contact since then, and that's what led to me joining Train 4 years ago.
Okay, gotcha. And at some point you were doing law, right?
I was, yeah. So I played professionally in Portland for about 3 years, and then decided to move from Portland to New York to work for a legal nonprofit there while applying to law school. And then I went to Penn Law in Philly, and then got a job at a big international law firm in New York City, and did that for almost 2 years before I got the call from Pat to see if I wanted to come out of retirement to come back to drums full time. I'd been playing kind of on the side, while practicing and going to law school, but both careers are pretty time intensive, if you're doing them on a professional level. So things were going great in law, and I was just kind of getting started in a lot of ways, but definitely missed playing drums. And it was, I was super excited and honored that to get that call from Pat and the guys in the band to see if I wanted to join up with them.
Yeah, so I'm really curious, what was going on in your head? What made you want to leave law and go back out on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what drew me to law in the first place, I mean, it was something that I thought about doing going into college. And, I was always involved with like student government and debate. and I enjoyed studying political science and history and things like that. So even though music is probably what I'm best at, just intellectually, law was something that was always interesting to me. And and being a touring musician is kind of it is a grind, being away from your loved ones and being on the road all the time. And, so I think that after doing it for a few years, I just was curious to kind of pursue the legal path. And I figured if I did it at a younger age, it'd be easier to kind of try to knock it out and give it a shot and see how it goes instead of trying to wait, way later in life. But throughout that process, I definitely miss playing drums because it's the most fun thing that I do, and it's just a lot of fun to connect with people, with other musicians, and with fans, around the world. So I think that Pat just caught me at a time when, like, I was working probably 80-hour weeks at the big firm, and I really enjoyed the work I was doing and the people I was working with, but big law, as it's known, is definitely it's a grind too, in a different way. And I think sometimes you have a grass is greener kind of view when you've made one decision and you're like, oh, what about the other thing that I could do? So I think it was kind of you caught me at one of those kind of moments when I was daydreaming over the course of a few months of, maybe at some point coming back to music. And I definitely had friends that were touring, touring around the world with well-known bands, that had stuck with it. And so it definitely was something I talked about with my then fiance and now wife. But I don't know if we really thought it would come about in this way, being able to play with a big band that, has won Grammys and toured the world and sold a lot of records. And, it's rare for anybody to have that opportunity, especially after, kind of taking a different professional path. So I was, when it did come up, I had to move quickly and had to think about it quickly, but in my gut, I knew that it was the right decision. And I was definitely nervous about talking to partners at the law firm about it, but right off the bat, they were like, this is amazing. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. You can always come back to practice law, but this is not something you can do every day. So it was nice to hear that from people who were at the top of their field saying, trust me, you got to do this.
Yeah.
So, so now I'm 4 years in, and it definitely don't regret the choice. It's been so much fun, and I've had the chance to play on 4 records with the band and play all sorts of iconic venues like Radio City Music Hall and Sydney Opera House and Red Rocks Amphitheater and Madison Square Garden, all these amazing places, and play on TV shows like Today Show and Jimmy Kimmel, and just all the things that you kind of dream about when you're a kid. And so to be able to do that with these musicians has been a real treat.
So you got the train gig, or the gig you're doing now, because you had played with Pat before. Was there anyone
That's
else
right.
he had in mind, or were you the guy and he knew it from the start? Did you have to audition? How did that kind of go?
Yeah, there were definitely other great drummers that auditioned and even actually that played a few gigs in the interim when the former original drummer Scott Underwood left the band, and then they still had shows because the band just is pretty busy a lot.
Right.
But Pat had I think there was like a special dynamic with that solo tour band that he had 10 years ago, and a lot of the people that are now in the band were in that band. So I was on drums. Our musical director Jerry Becker is on keys and guitar. He was in the band. Our lead guitarist now, Luis Maldonado, was in the band. And one of our background singers, Sakai, was also in that band, and she's in Train now. And then Luis, our guitarist, his brother, Hector Maldonado, is the bass player and has been in Train for almost 10 years. So I think that in Pat's mind, he was thinking having that kind of that special dynamic that I think we had in that solo tour band, trying to recreate that. And then kind of move forward from there and see kind of where we could take the brand of Train and kind of, just go in different musical directions. And we've been real fortunate. I mean, last summer our single Play That Song went platinum, and that was my first experience being able to play on something like that, even though Pat and the band have had a lot of songs that have done well. just to be able to do it after the band's been around for almost 25 years is pretty cool. Because, as you know, music changes pretty rapidly. And a lot of times when people have success with one song, it doesn't mean that you're going to get another hit, let alone like 10 to 15 or so, so, so it's real impressive though, how he's able to continue to do that. So, so I think that, I think he kept me in mind because I think we work well together. I think he liked my playing, and I think just, professionally and personally, it just was a good fit. And, I think he called me up to see if I was interested, and I was still working at the firm. And so I was still working crazy hours, and I would get off at like maybe 9 p.m. and then go rehearse at some Midtown Manhattan like studio on my own, just like getting the songs together. Because when you live in an apartment in Manhattan, it's not like you have a drum set readily available all the time. In the meantime, just trying to like quickly decide whether or not if this thing happened, if I was willing to do it. But I think I knew that I would, but I still was kind of in shock, and it was moving very quickly, So I had about 2 weeks before the initial call, before they happened to be coming to New York, and they wanted to audition me just to see if it was still a good fit, if I sounded okay. So I rehearsed probably like six to 10 songs, just kind of the big hits. And then about 2 songs in, Pat was like, "All right, I've heard everything I need to hear. The gig's yours if you want it," which was pretty cool. I think he just wanted to make sure the vibe was right, sounded okay. So I was really lucky that it happened so quickly. And then I put in my 2 weeks notice the next day at the firm. And that was definitely scary because, I was lucky to go to Ivy League law school and get one of those kind of top firm jobs in New York. And it's not one that people walk away from lightly, but, again, once I started having those conversations, people were like, "No, this is awesome. You got to do it." So I think people were really supportive, and, so everything's just kind of gone from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting cut off early in an audition is either really good or really bad.
Yeah, that's true. He could have been like, "I've heard everything I need to hear.
Yeah.
Good luck to you."
We'll be in contact. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally.
So, take us back to the first time you met Pat, which I guess would have been around, that album came out, 2007?
Yeah.
So what was the process like then, and how did it differ from, I guess, the callback all these years later?
Yeah, I mean, that was a unique situation too. I mean, I was 24 at the time and had some national tours with a few artists, but still he was, by far the biggest artist that I had toured with. I just was, working in Portland, touring out of Portland, and I had worked with this producer, Greg Williams, who's a great drummer, who's played with Sheryl Crow and some other people. And I think they were, the band was looking for a drummer in the tour. I mean, they had a drummer who was really great, but it wasn't the right fit, and they were looking to find someone new during the tour. And so they were coming through Portland, and it was literally like who's available in Portland that can hop on the tour. Which is super unique, So I think they reached out to Greg Williams, somebody in the band it was like a friend of a friend recommendation. Actually, Luis's manager, our guitarist's manager, is this guy, Kenny, who lived in Portland. And so I think he's the one that was like, "Oh, Greg's great." Greg was like, "I just produce records. I don't play as much. So you should hire this young drummer, Drew." And so then Luis and Jerry, the guys that are now in the band who were in the solo band, they came to my house, and it was just some small house in North Portland. I just had a roommate, and I was like, "Hey man, the dude from Train's band is going to come over and audition me." So we just played in my living room, played a couple Train songs, played a Zeppelin song. And admittedly, I wasn't even like a Zeppelin guy. Like I didn't really grow up on classic rock. Right. I grew up on jazz and hip hop and like alternative, like 90s rock,
Yeah.
I've come to appreciate, obviously, classic rock, especially playing in this band where we play a lot of covers. So then I didn't hear anything. So I was like, I probably didn't get that. And then a couple days later, I got a call like super late after one of their shows. And they were like, "Okay, so the gig's yours. You're going to fly to check out the show in Salt Lake. You need to ship your drums to Denver. And then, unfortunately, we're going to have to let the other drummer go after the show that you watch, and then you're going to get on the tour bus and finish the tour.
Nice.
Which is, horrible for the other guy. And definitely very scary for me. I was excited for the opportunity, but, I was compared to all the other guys, pretty green too. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
definitely intimidating, but luckily it worked out, and I was able to quickly learn a ridiculous amount of songs and play them all right. And I didn't lose the job. So,
Yeah.
so I think both times getting into both both versions of the band have been kind of unique. But I think ultimately you just gotta just remain open and kind of check in with your professional goals and what you're hoping to do as a musician or with any profession, because I think a lot of times, like when new job opportunities come up, it's not always when you planned for it, but if you're just working hard and doing your best at the job you have, but also like continuing to network broadly and kind of think beyond what your current circumstances, like it could lead to things, even if you don't know when those things are going to happen.
Right.
So I think that even though my career path is odd, or at least not as traditional as other musicians, like it makes sense to me and it makes sense for my journey. And I don't regret taking time to go to law school. I think it was really great for me. And who knows what that will lead to professionally down the line. But right now, I think I've been lucky enough to, I feel, continue to kind of stumble into, interesting professional situations. And it always feels like like I'm growing instead of, taking a step back or making a mistake or whatever, so it's very fortunate to how things have worked out so far.
So both these stories you told me, and a lot of stories I've heard from a lot of people that have been on this podcast, they all have in common one thing, and that is the musician's ability to learn a ton of songs in almost no amount of time. So what is your approach to doing that? That's something that fascinates me. And I love learning a ton of songs in a short amount of time. I enjoy the challenge, but I know a lot of people struggle with that. So I'm wondering what tips and advice you could give to our listeners on that.
Yeah, I think you should probably just play to whatever your learning strengths are. So if you're a visual learner and you know how to sight read music, you should probably take time to maybe notate parts out if you can. I know a lot of my friends learn that way, so they're able to kind of like commit it to photographic memory, and they're able to internalize the parts while they're transcribing the parts. I'm able to do that, but I don't always do that unless something's really tripping me up. A lot of times I'm just pretty much just immediately listening to the music as much as possible, even if I don't have the drums in front of me. So if I'm on the treadmill, I'm listening, or if you're driving or you're on the subway, I'm just kind of like listening to the music and just trying to learn it. And then once I'm behind the kit, I just start playing along to it. And I'll just take it one song at a time, and I'll take a first listen. I'll just kind of play along, and once I kind of feel it, and then I'll play it maybe 3 or 4 times, and just play it all the way through, just to kind of get the lay of the land of the song. And then if I'm learning several songs, I'll just move on and do that with all the songs. And then once I revisit songs is when I start to isolate parts that are tripping me up. If there's a certain fill or a certain groove that's more tricky, I'll just go immediately to that part and slow it down and try to think about it. And then piece it back together with within the whole of the song. So it's just a process of continuing to like over prepare as much as possible, even if it's a short amount of time, but just like fully immersing myself into trying to learn it. And then when you have to actually finally play it with people, just trying not to get too stressed out about it, and just like trying to be musical and make a good musical choice. Like even if you don't nail it right away, just trying to, I mean, obviously you want it to be as perfect as possible, but you also want to just feel like you're confidently playing, because I feel like people can tell if you're not confident.
Absolutely.
But the more you prepare, the more confident you'll be. Right. So, yeah, so that's kind of my approach, but, yeah. And I mean, I think transcribing can help. And when I have time, I try to do that, but I think that's more for me. Like if you have more time, you can do that. Like if you have a month to prepare,
Yeah.
then you can like sit there and chart things out. But honestly, I normally don't show up with charts. I just
Yeah.
try to have
Okay.
it in my head.
So when you chart stuff for drums, do you chart stuff like note for note, like someone like Kenny Aronoff would, or would you kind of be more sketch with it?
If it's like a very particular drum groove, I will chart I'll notate the whole, like that part, like whatever the pattern is. But if it's just more like trying to remember like the form of the song,
Yeah.
like, there are eight bars here in the verse, and then the bridge is, 16 bars. Then it'll be more just like the overall,
Gotcha.
path, or the overall kind of, path for the song. That I tend to do that more in, recording situations though,
Okay.
like when you're actually sometimes hearing a song for the first time in the studio and you just don't want to mess up a take. So even if you're still figuring out the part, but you're just trying to get through it. Because I know a lot of times when I recorded, even when it was like budget recordings and people were just trying to move quickly, or even with Train, where honestly, like our singer just, a lot of times he just wants to get to the point where once we've got the arrangement down, he hopes that the next take or two is the one. Like he just wants to move quickly and he likes to capture that early kind of energy,
Right.
almost like first thought, best thought, almost,
Right. Absolutely. Historically, I think that's proven time and time again to be great as well throughout all kinds of albums.
It's interesting. I mean, especially if you're recording to a click and you're using Pro Tools, like it's probably fine just to like go for it and hope that it works out. I feel like sometimes once I finally figure out the form and what I'm trying to do, I still feel like it's probably 2 or 3 takes away, because there's like a confident take that's going to happen a couple takes later.
Right.
And then you hit the diminishing returns part where like, then you're just kind of phoning it in and it seems a little more sterile. So just trying to find that balance, and it's different for everybody. But since the drummer, a lot of times like everybody else can redo their part, they can retrack and punch in. Drums can obviously do that too, but just given cymbal bleed and the fact that you're trying to establish the feel, I just really try to stay focused, and hopefully not mess up. I try to strike that balance between laying it down and being musical, and being creative, but also almost like not taking major risks. At least in the studio version, because I just would rather get like a musical solid take, than come up with the most epic like fill or whatever. Yeah. unless it's something we've talked about and it's like, okay, here's where you got to do this crazy thing. But most of the hits that you've heard, probably like it's just going to be kind of
right. It's all in support of the vocal.
Most of the time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So
what do your practice routines look like, either on or off tour, warm ups, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So on tour, it's hard to get into like a full on practice routine. Luckily we're touring in arenas and we actually have a little bit of space to have like a jam room backstage. So I have like a little practice kit with me. And everybody has like little small amps. And so a lot of times we'll just like play just play other songs that we know, or we might run through something for the set, or we'll just come up with a spontaneous jam. And we tend to do that maybe about an hour before the show. We'll kind of just jam for 30 minutes or so, before we're getting ready. Earlier in the day, we have a sound check. And so, at some point before sound check or before the show, I often will do like a practice pad routine or get on the practice kit, and at least warm up. Something when I'm pinched for time and I don't have a lot of times I'll go through. Mark Juliana is a really great jazz drummer in New York, and he put out a book last year. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's he only has one, so it's that one. But Mark Juliana, and he talks about basically how drummers often just go through basically like rate changes. So if you think about like, say you're playing eighth notes and then you go to triplets and then you go to 16th notes, right? And a lot of times if you're playing those patterns consistently, like a lot of those notes all at once, you can settle into a consistent groove. But when you try to quickly go back and forth between those rates, that's when things get a little iffy sometimes in your time or your feel, because, triplets are different than 16th notes, and so he kind of just gives tips for like confidently like going back and forth between those ranges. So a lot of times I'll just like set the metronome at like 70 and start to just play like two measures of eighth notes, and then two measures of triplets, and two measures of 16th notes, and keep going back and forth, and then slowly decreasing the amount of time in between those notes. So ultimately just working to just like, one quarter note's worth of one of those rates, and then kind of going from there. And then I'll maybe incorporate that into a groove around the kit, and then slowly work up just like to a comfortable or like a faster tempo. And I just kind of do that just to like loosen up, but also think about the main types of patterns and rhythms that I'll be playing on the kit, but in kind of a focused way. And then it also just gives me a chance to focus my mind before the show. And so then by the time I get on the stage and have to hit hard and play in front of a lot of people, hopefully I'm not tight, I'm not tense by that point, because just with our band being like a rock band, a pop band, like I have to start hitting hard right away. There's no like time really to warm up. So you have to be kind of ready to go. But when I'm home and I have more time, maybe it's my lawyer training where I like to actually kind of divide up time and like set a time limit, and also keep a practice journal of the things that I'm working on. But it makes me feel more accomplished at the end of the day if I actually plan ahead about what I'm actually going to be working on for the day. So normally, right now, at least, what I was doing when I was home before tour, I'm working through some different books that I like, that are just have kind of different genres and philosophical approaches. So right now I'm going through the Drummer's Complete Vocabulary, which is a bunch of rudiments that kind of are all the drum. It's like the Alan Dawson method, just of all the rudiments that drummers use. But I'm just kind of like going through those, but that's really my warm up, and I'll do that for 30 minutes. And then I'll move on to Future Sounds, the David Garibaldi book, where he's a great funk drummer with Tower of Power, but he talks about kind of linear drumming, but it's all groove based, and it's very like 16th note based. So that's like kind of like working on my groove time. And then I'll do John Riley's like The Art of Bop Drumming, which is just like a bebop book to kind of just work on my jazz, even though I don't get a chance to play a lot of jazz these days. But I still, like, when you do get called for a jazz gig, I don't want to like embarrass myself. So I still try to keep that up. And it's always, fun to work on those chops, because I feel like it's the secret sauce that kind of slips in to define like the way that I play pop and rock music. It's just kind of the extra little like subtle kind of stuff that I think I can offer. Mm-hmm. And then I'll maybe work on some Latin, Afro-Cuban, and then ultimately I'll prepare like music for whatever I'm working on, like gig wise. And then by the end, I'll allow myself to maybe just like play whatever, or work on soloing, or maybe just put Spotify on shuffle and listen to some of the songs I've been listening to lately and jam along with those. But that kind of more freeform, like loosey-goosey stuff kind of happens at the end. But then I tend to like when I'm playing more at the end, because I've already gone through this very focused, like practice regimen. So,
right.
So yeah. So anyway, sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's
perfect.
That's ultimately kind of, it's very like keeping track, keeping a journal, coming ahead of time, being like, okay, I'm going to work on this, because then you don't just go down the rabbit hole of just like sitting down and jamming and being like, I don't really know what I accomplished. Yeah. I don't feel like I progressed.
Exactly. Do you have any tips for staying healthy, happy when touring, any of that kind of stuff? Just any tour tips in general, because it can be such a grueling thing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm always thinking about those things. And I think, you have to do the things that make you healthy and happy, and like make the choices that will keep you kind of satisfied out here. And so for me, those things involve like meditation. I try to like just meditate a little bit every day, going to the gym, working out, trying to get some exercise, because that's hard to do when you're like always on the tour bus or on a plane. Trying to eat as healthily as possible if you can. Trying not to eat super late if you can, like those kind of things.
Right.
It's hard, but especially as you get older, you just really start to feel it when you're not doing those things. And then for me, since I'm away from my wife and friends and stuff, I just, I'm lucky enough to have friends in different cities. So if I can, I just try to like reach out to friends ahead of time and meet up with people in different cities for coffee or, whatever, or invite them to the show and try to meet up afterwards. Cause I really love the people I work with and play with in the band, but it's nice to kind of reconnect with people outside of that circle too,
Right.
because when you're in a band and traveling, it's almost like you are living with your coworkers, if you have a normal job and you happen to, you get off at whatever 5 or 6, and then you have to like go home and live with those people. Like that's kind of intense, in any normal circumstance. So, even though we enjoy our time together, I think sometimes everybody needs time away from each other. So, so those are tips for me. And then also just like the warming up and practicing as much as I can, because you do get frustrated sometimes with your touring chops, like where you're playing the same songs every night. So you kind of settle into your whatever patterns you're into at the moment. So sometimes if you can try to set aside some practice time and warm up time, you can kind of check in with your, like where you're at with things, and try to progress, if you can.
Right. So, can you walk us through the production of such a major label act as Train? Like what goes on during a live show? I know it's probably so many moving parts. At least it seems that way from the audience.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's we have a big crew, of people who work really hard to make it easy for us to just show up and do what we need to do. But, for instance, I have a drum tech, John Jackson, who's a really great guy who's worked in the industry a really long time. He used to tech, for Ben Wysocki of the band The Fray. And then he was with All American Rejects and all sorts of great drummers and bands. So he does an amazing job setting up my drums, tuning them so that when I sit down, it's the same every day. Like it always sounds great. It always is set up exactly how I like it. And he's there during the show if something goes wrong. So we're lucky that, each one of us have a tech that's there to kind of help us set up our stuff and tune guitars and hand you guitars on guitar switches. And then we have a monitor tech who runs our in-ear monitors to make sure we're hearing everything we need to hear for the show. And then we have the front of house person who's running sound out front. You have the lighting director who's running the light show, and the content on the screen. So in this particular show, we have big screens behind us, and so there's a lot of content that's tracking what's happening on our show. And so, some of our songs are just, they're not on click, and we're just kind of, if we're playing a Led Zeppelin cover or we're playing Meet Virginia, we'll just play it. But a lot of times we have click and we have track, and it's synced up to MIDI and SMPTE that will send, certain digital messages to the guy running lights so that he can kind of track certain things that are happening. So it makes it, a synchronized experience for people in the audience.
Right.
But we have different scenes for every song. There's some cool new visual happening behind us. And every tour, sometimes it's the person who's running our lights is the one that comes up with that. But a lot of times, big bands will actually work with production companies to come up with a plan for, what kind of what's the overall theme of the tour. Like last summer we put out a single called Play That Song, and we were trying to we had a jukebox theme. So the stage looked like a jukebox. And we were kind of taking people through different old time music, music from the 40s and 50s and 60s, and then kind of synthesizing that into our current music, because even Train as a band from the beginning has gone through a lot of different kind of transformations in terms of the way that music sounds. So you just want to be able to tell a story with the songs and the way that the visuals work together, in addition to just like whatever you're playing on the instrument. But I feel like we're still kind of an old school band in that, like, we just try to feature the musicianship of the people on stage, and our singer is such a great front person and really goes out of his way to introduce everybody and give everybody a moment to shine during the show in terms of like a little solo or whatever. But if you go all the way up to like a stadium tour, like a Taylor Swift or a Beyonce, I mean, they have dancers and choreography and like all sorts of people involved, and the setup takes days instead of one day. So we're not on that level, but just from my friends that have toured on that level, that's a whole nother can of worms too. But where we're at, we're very fortunate to have such a big team of people that make it work. And not to mention people who locally work at the different venues. So you have local crew that's helping out with the load in of all the lights and the gear. You have local caterers making food for everybody. We have a person that travels with us selling our merchandise. It's big. We're all in tour buses, and then we have big trucks full of gear. It's a massive operation just for like 2 hours worth of entertainment.
Yeah, definitely. So are you in charge of kind of kicking off the songs with the clicks, and are you running like an Ableton rig? Like, how is that working technically in your world?
I work with a guy named Tim Shanehalls, and he's our track, the person who runs our tracks, as well as he's our bass tech as well. And so with our musical director Jerry Becker and Tim and I, we try to make sure that the tracks are. Jerry makes sure that Tim has the tracks that he needs, and then I just coordinate in terms of how we start and stop them, and kind of what we're looking for in terms of click and how much of a count in lead in do we need to a song to know when we need to start and all those types of things. And but yeah, from where I'm at, I have a pedal, so I am able to start and stop songs.
Okay.
If there's a problem, I can kill it. Normally there isn't, but so when I hit that switch, it talks to the laptop that Tim is running, and it starts the tracks, and then those are sent out front so the people in the audience can hear them. And we have a backup laptop in case that one fails, which happens sometimes, and if all those fail, then I have to stop it, and we just kind of go from there without the tracks. But it was stressful at first, kind of getting used to that. But in a modern day pop gig, that's just how it goes.
For sure.
And a lot of drummers are expected to, a lot of times, they're the musical directors. They're the ones running tracks if you're doing like smaller venues and things. So,
right.
So we're running Digital Performer. But okay. I know that Ableton Live is a lot of people are using that. I think Digital Performer used to be one that a lot of people use. And I think originally when we started using tracks years ago, that was kind of industry standard, and things have changed since then. But so it's great kind of figuring all that stuff out. And I also have a roll-in pad where I have where I trigger samples especially from the newer songs that have like interesting kick sounds or snare sounds or claps that I want to get from the record. And so I'm able to actually recreate those sounds. So we really do try our best to, represent the record faithfully, but then, figure out moments where we can kind of deviate and make a live version of it too.
Yeah.
So we just try to split that difference.
I got to know, what is the craziest thing that's ever gone wrong back there in the pilot seat?
Yeah. I mean, well, sometimes, it's like I was describing, kind of worst case scenario. Sometimes the backup laptop fails, it doesn't happen that much, but I think it's just, I think what happens is the worst bummer is when like you have a count off and it glitches while the count off's happening, and it's like, well, 1, 2, 3, and it's like off, and then people don't know whether or not they're supposed to start, and then like, so you have to just stop the song entirely, and you try your best not to let the audience know what's happening, but every once in a while, if it's really bad, you just have to stop the whole thing. I think ultimately, like, say if a guitarist needed to come in with an intro or a singer needed to come in and they didn't, it's hard to fake it if they don't know where they're at,
Right.
So those have been, there's not like one particular time, but I guess another problem I had, just not with a track problem, but we were playing Jimmy Kimmel live, and we had put out a Led Zeppelin 2 cover album, and I use in-ear monitors, and I was the only guy that didn't use a wireless pack. I would actually just go hardwire into a cable.
Theoretically more stable.
Theoretically more stable. I've since just switched to a wireless pack, and it's been fine. But But when I first made that switch, I just wasn't in the habit of when I put on my ears, I would just typically put on my ears and go, but everybody else would put on their ears and put on their pack. And I wasn't used to that yet. So we're going out to play Kimmel, and then like I forgot my pack. But we were playing Zeppelin, and there was luckily no click.
Okay, so you just had to monitor, kind of couldn't really hear as well.
I just had to play it like, and look, we were just playing Heartbreaker, but still I couldn't hear the guitars as well as I wanted to.
Did you have a wedge for backup, or
no?
So you're just kind of listening to the mains as best you can.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's always fun, especially
and if you listen to the performance. I don't think you can tell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I was like kind of mortified, trying to like get through it. And then afterwards, our monitor guy was like, "Man, you should have just told me. I could have given you a backup pack." And I was just like, I didn't want to make a big deal about it,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I think if it were one where there was click and track, like I would have just had to be like, we got to do this,
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's crazy about those live situations. You hope everything goes well, but every once in a while it doesn't. And luckily in that case, I don't think anybody could tell.
Do you have a favorite moment during the show?
Yeah, I think it's when we play Drops of Jupiter at the end of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And on the album version, on the last chorus, it's just like a normal chorus. But in the live version, we kind of cut out and let the audience sing the last like na 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 na, and then I get to do like a boom,
yep,
boom, cat, like a full on just arena rock moment.
That's awesome.
With just me in the crowd for like 8 measures. So that's always just great. It's like kind of one of the more iconic like 80s rock drummer kind of things you could do. It's just exactly, and it's just it's an exciting moment where everybody comes together and just screams at the top of their lungs, and then we get to come back in with a pretty epic, fill and stuff. So that's definitely a highlight of every show, and I get to end the night that way every time. So it's hard not to come off stage with without like a big adrenaline rush.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a magic song for sure. I was gonna ask. I forget what I was going to ask, so we're going to move on. So shifting gears to the studio, what tips do you have for kind of preparing to a studio, and how does that differ from live prep?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the studio, like I was mentioning earlier, I'm just trying to be creative and come up with like somewhere in between like a tried and true, like, Ringo Starr or like Steve Jordan or Questlove, just like laying it down beat, but then maybe just some little flourish or nuance that makes it unique and something new if it's appropriate for the song, right? But then doing it consistently so I don't mess up the take.
Right.
So just like philosophy wise, that's what I'm always thinking about. Ultimately just serving the song. And in doing that informs, okay, what kind of snare am I going to use? Am I going to go with a Black Beauty, like 6.5 by 14, like a deeper snare? Am I going to like tune it low? Am I going to throw like a T cloth on it or a big fat snare drum to kind of drop the tone? Or, we're trying that out and it seems a little dead. Let's go with a Superphonic or an Acrolite that's but 5 inches, just kind of maybe crank it a little bit. So, always just thinking about like, okay, what kind of snare choice is going to serve the song? Do I want to add more muffling to the toms? Do I want to like use a bright cymbal or a dark cymbal? So I, often just try to make sure and bring different snare choices, cymbal choices, work with the studio ahead of time to see what they have in stock. So you figure out what you need to bring. Think of, if you do have access to whatever songs, sketches of songs you're going to be performing, listening to those ahead of time so you're as prepared as possible. But, it's interesting. I try to over prepare for gigs, but sometimes with recording, I do want to like leave room for some inspiration on the spot, assuming it's not like super technically challenging. And so I try to like listen and be ready, but also not have demoitis and just be married to whatever like initial conception of what I thought I was going to do is going to be, because it's going to change. Like the producer's going to be like, let's try it this way. Or the singer's going to be like, I'm not really feeling that. or the, whatever, as a band, you'll decide to play it at a completely different tempo or with a different feel. So you got to be flexible and ready. But I try to come up with a couple ideas like ahead of time. If it's like, oh, maybe on this one, let's start with like a tom groove instead of a hi-hat groove. Or maybe on this one, let's just do like shaker and tambourine or something, or just kick drum. And then ultimately kind of come up with a normal groove, especially like if you're doing, say you're working with like a singer-songwriter. Like I used to do a lot of singer-songwriter Portland sessions where it was like Americana, mellow. And at a certain point, you're like, I don't want every song to sound exactly the same too, so you just start thinking about how you can be creative and just switch up the vibe a little bit so that when they listen to their record, they're not like, oh man, this drummer played the same thing every time, so use brushes or use mallets or add a little sizzler to the ride cymbal, like those kind of things, maybe, like play tom focused beats or turn the snare off on, all sorts of things. So I get inspired by just listening to iconic performances, records, and listening to what they did. But also just Instagram and YouTube are such a great tool for seeing what amazing drummers like, say, Aaron Sterling, who plays with John Mayer and all sorts of people. Like he's always posting videos of sessions he does from his house. And he's always super creative, like throwing all sorts of weird jangly things on the snare or like trying different mic placements just to get kind of unique performances.
That's funny. You beautifully answered the question I was going to ask next, which is how do you stay creative and inspired? Which is always one of my favorite questions to ask.
Yeah, I think, like just trying different drum setups, using different drum sticks, different tunings, different configurations, different snares, different beaters on the bass drum, like different types of heads, like going like, okay, so typically I use, wood drums on tour. I'm normally playing like Ludwig classic maple drums when I'm playing in the live setting. But this summer, I just was like, I'm going to use an acrylic kit. I'm going to go with a Vistalite. And, Ludwig had their 45th anniversary of Vistalite kits. And, it's iconic. It's what Bonham played a lot. And, so now I'm using like clear heads on the Vistalites, but then Remo, the company I work with for heads, they release these color tone heads that kind of, when you're playing a clear acrylic kit, they take on the color of the head, but they also have like this interesting thuddy kind of lower sound to them. So I've been switching up heads and trying different tunings or not necessarily tunings, but just different heads throughout the tour. You don't want to switch it up too much for your bandmates so that you don't want to like irritate them. But, it has been interesting to kind of push me in a different direction because acrylic kits are just really loud. So trying to find my voice on that kit has been a lot of fun because it makes you play sometimes more aggressively, because you're excited to kind of get that really loud, clear tone from the toms, but they respond differently. So anyway, so that's an example of like in this, I've done 5 summer tours with the band. And so like, what's something I could do to kind of bring some new excitement to me and the band, and everybody in the band plays drums too. And so they get excited when they show up and they're like, oh, that's a cool looking kit, or, oh, I like those heads, or, oh man, what's that new Zildjian cymbal you got? Like that sounds like the Ringo Starr cymbal or whatever, like that kind of thing. So it's kind of fun to switch it up, to stay creative and keep the people that you're working with excited, because we all respond to each other's tones and ideas on each other's instruments. So, you don't want to like go, when you go too far down the gear rabbit hole, like, it can be obsessive, but when it's done in order to like create excitement and creativity, I think it's a good thing. And I think that we all are coming from that place in the band.
So how would you say the studio experience with a major label band like Train differs from maybe a small label or no label unsigned band?
I think that, we're fortunate enough to be able to go into great studios and work with famous producers. And then you may have more time to work on music. And then once it comes out, Columbia Records is willing to put a lot of people power behind trying to get a song on the radio, and just with all the PR rollout of a song and an album, they help set up the TV shows that you're playing on in order to promote songs and tours. So that that's the advantage that comes with having major label financial backing on something like that. I think that indie projects, though, when you're starting out, you might actually have more, even though you may not have as much money to work with, you might have more creative license to kind of push the boundaries of what you're trying to do with your band, because the reality is, I mean, there are famous indie rock bands that do really well, like The National or Arcade Fire. But a lot of times, you're playing niche markets, smaller clubs or big cities, and so you're like, you know what, I'm just going to stay true to whatever this vision is for my band, and I'm going to be creative, and it might be like more lo-fi or whatever, but like the reality is, when you have had hits and you have sold a lot of records, like, you are trying to stay true to yourself as an artist, but you're also trying to do that again. Right. So it's like a different kind of pressure, right? So we're also trying to write hits, and that's hard because, like, how do you do that? Like, even if you've done it, there's no formula to it. And even if you try to copy the vibe of another hit, doesn't mean yours is going to be a hit. And also, music changes so frequently. Like, how do you anticipate? Like, it's not like, okay, we're going in the studio, we got to try to make an album that sounds like what's sounding like what's out right now. It's like, we got to try to anticipate where it's going 8 months from now. Or you want to do a throwback album, or you're just like, who cares? We're just going to do whatever we're going to do. And I think that's ultimately kind of where you're at in that kind of major label situation. Like, even a band like Arcade Fire is on Columbia Records, and LCD Sound System's on Columbia Records now, but they are, I think those indie bands that kind of built their credibility over 10 years, can finally switch over to a major label and still have probably more creative license to do what they want to do. But they're still probably trying to, even like Arcade Fire, for instance, I've been a big fan of theirs for a long time. Their most recent record on a major label is more poppy, for sure. It still sounds like Arcade Fire, but like, it's more, danceable and all that, so I don't know if that was intentional or if they had someone telling them to do that, but either way, you now have this new platform to bring your music to the masses, and maybe you're hoping for some commercial success if you're getting that kind of backing, So I think those are some things to think about.
Okay. One of the last few things I want to ask you is rehearsal tips. We've talked about studio, we've talked about tour. How can musicians conduct the most efficient and effective rehearsals possible? Either individual practice we talked about a little bit, but mostly in a group.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to think about what you're trying to accomplish for the day when you're rehearsing with people. I think, like, if you haven't seen everybody for a while, like, you want to hang and make sure the vibe is cool and go get food and, like, get drinks and hang out and all that. But, like, ultimately, if you're there to work, you want to just make sure, like, ahead of time, you're like, okay, we're trying to tackle rehearsing these songs, or we're trying to write this type of song, or whatever it may be. You think about, like, a deadline, and you just try to stay on task. And also, you just try to respect each other, because artists get sensitive and frustrated, and it's part of what fuels, why you end up being a good musician, is because you're in touch with your emotions and those types of things. But, if you create a negative atmosphere where you're, like, attacking each other or going off, like, that's not fun. It's not productive. And you definitely have to be ready to take suggestions, though, too. Like, if people have it, like, hey, let's try it like this, but try not to take it personally, and be willing to try something different. But also, when you're telling somebody or asking somebody to try something a certain way, just be cool about it. Like, don't make it like a pointed, like, why would you ever try it that way? That sucks. Like, that's not helpful. So I think just, like, coming in with, like, a focused, respectful, good vibe attitude, like, I think will ultimately lead to a productive rehearsal or writing session or recording session or whatever it may be.
Okay. What is some of your favorite music? Jeez, can't talk. That people would never guess you would love.
Oh, man, I have very eclectic tastes. Although when I was growing up as a as a as a black guy in Portland, Oregon, in the Northwest in the '90s, like, I would hang out with, certain groups of kids and listen to hip hop, and other groups of kids and listen to alternative rock, and I liked it all. I listened to all of it. I loved Nirvana, and I loved Biggie Smalls. Like I was about all of it. And I think at the time it was like it was when I was growing up, it was still more clicky. Like you couldn't, like you had to kind of pick one, and I wasn't willing to
Right.
do that. But I feel like kids these days like can listen to whatever, and I think streaming and has made it very easy to like quickly access all sorts of things. Hip hop obviously has become the main pop music, so things have changed on that front. But so anyway, and I also like jazz as a kid too. So like that. So today I listen to all of that. I listen to a lot of indie rock. The bands like I mentioned, I really like The National and LCD Sound System, Arcade Fire, like all that. And then kind of an up and coming, or not up and coming, but like less known but really awesome band called Unknown Mortal Orchestra out of Portland. Just really cool psychedelic funk, soul, rock. It's amazing. Super indie, but really, really great, lush recording sounds. And then in the hip hop world, like I've just been a lot of times, like I'm not really listening to a lot of like underground stuff. I like Kendrick Lamar and Kanye and Jay-Z and like kind of the more mainstream releases, but still I admittedly stuff that probably like from artists that were probably around like 10 years ago or so, and less so from like brand new artists. That I realize I'm just getting old though. Uh, but I grew up loving Tribe Called Quest, and even though I grew up on the West Coast, I always loved East Coast rap, because as a jazz guy, I just always loved the samples and the
Yeah.
musicality and kind of like Nas's music or like Tribe's music. Like it just was always really, really great. And then jazz wise, like I do try to stay up on like contemporary jazz players. So I love Robert Glasper and Brad Meldau and Christian Scott, and just there's so many amazing like LA musicians too, like Kamasi Washington and Thundercat and Taylor McFerrin, who's like Bobby McFerrin's son, is an amazing like writer, producer, piano player. So yeah, I listen to everything basically is what I'm trying to say. So even though I play in a like pop rock band, like we all come from very different musical perspectives. And I've also like I didn't grow up listening to classic rock, so in the time that I've played with Train, I've kind of gone back and like gotten more into just bands that you would expect, like Rolling Stones or the Beatles or Led Zeppelin. But like my parents listened to like Luther Vandross and gospel music. They weren't playing the Beatles. So
Right.
even though some people grew up with that, I didn't, and it's never too late to dive into any of that. Love Motown, soul, like, man, I just could go on and on. But I do feel like, you were talking about being inspired and creativity. Like that's how I get inspired. Like if I continue to listen to different things, I may sit down and be like, oh, I really like this new Jay-Z and Beyonce song. I'm going to try to write a track like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do it and it doesn't sound anything like that. But at least when I started, I was like inspired by it. But then
Right.
ultimately I like find my own voice through that journey of creativity. Right. And then how I may program a drum beat is way different than I would actually sit down and play it behind a kit, So if I'm trying to add real drums to it, that might come out way differently too. So I'm also inspired by like podcasts, like I'll listen to Bill Simmons or Still Processing or NPR Up First, or Malcolm Gladwell Revisionist History, and then like hear a story that inspires me to write a song about it, or I'll read a book or an article and that'll inspire me to write lyrics, So I think like you just have to be ready. It's not like the muse strikes at different times, but I think if you devote time methodically to like do the things that you're inspired by, like ultimately the muse will strike, like and then once it is happening, you just have to be like open to it.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds like an amazing place to end. So, Drew, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. This has been an amazing interview, and you've given so much insight to our listeners, and I can't wait to release it. So thanks again for
thanks a lot
giving up some time.
for having me. Yeah, my pleasure.
Absolutely. And we'll stay in touch, and I'll be in touch about all of this as well.
Sounds good. All right. Take care. Have a great day.
All right, man. See ya. Hey, guys. First of all, thank you so much for listening. If you could please take a quick moment to subscribe on iTunes and leave a rating and review. Your feedback seriously is really important, and it helps us keep the show alive.
Check out musicianstalkshow.com to sign up for our mailing list. If you do, we're going to send you our main theme song and a few other surprises. Plus, you'll always be the first to know what episodes are coming up.
If you want to help support the show so we can keep putting out the highest quality content possible, please follow the Support the Show link at our website and consider donating to our Patreon page.
Lastly, if you have an idea for a guest or a question you want to discuss, contact us through any of the contact forms on our website, and we'll do everything we can to make it happen.
Whew, all right. That was a lot, but we got through it. Thanks again, guys, and we will see you soon.